Hi, this is Mary Hansen. This presentation is on setting up a data file to provide value labels and variable labels. Once you're in SPSS, once you are in Citrix, you will open up SPSS from the Start menu using Start, All Programs, SPSS for Windows, and SPSS 17. For this particular example, I am going to use the data set an existing data set. So when I see the open an existing data source, I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And I'm going to find a data source that is on the passouts drive. So I'm going to click down this arrow and go to the passouts drive, the Hansen folder, and the EDUC 6065 subfolder. And I'm going to open up the Computer Project 1 data file.sav. I'm going to highlight that file and click on Open. Alternatively, I could double click on that file. When I open the file, I notice that it takes me to the Data View screen in SPSS, and I see that I have a number of data points entered. There are 150 cases in the data set, and there is an ID field, and then Q1 through Q14. When I go to the variable view screen, I can see how these variables and values for the variables are defined. Note that in the computer project, you are asked to provide labels for some of your variables as well as value labels. For Q1, the label is the gender. And so I'm going to go ahead and type in gender in the label column and hit enter. Then I want to enter the descriptions for the codes of 1 and 2 that have been entered for gender. So to do that, I'm going to click in the values column for the Q1 row, and note when I click in that cell, a little gray box appears. I'm going to click on that little gray box, and this is where I'm going to enter value labels. For gender, the value of 1 represents females. So I'm going to say as the label female, and then I'm going to make sure that I click this add button. And SPSS will then know that a 1 will represent female. So in my output, when I want to obtain the information, it will be labeled as gender, female and male rather than just 1s and 2s. So for my value of 2, I'm going to have the label male, and I'm going to go ahead and add that. After I've added both of my values, I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. Now you can see when I click on the gray box that there is some information in there. I could go up to the column. Automatically I get this arrow, and I could spread that out a little bit if I want to. Then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for question 2, which is age. Then I'm going to click in the values on the little gray box. For the first value, I'm going to say that a 1 is representing 17 years. I'm going to add that value in. A 2 will represent 18 to 20 years. Note that if I forget to hit the add button and go ahead and click on OK, I get an error message from SPSS. Again, it's imperative that you start to read the error messages. This message says any pending add or change operations will be lost. Well, pending is my operation that is going to label a value of 2 as 18 to 20 years. So I'm not going to click on OK and lose that. Instead, I'm going to hit cancel, which will take me back to the screen so I can add that in. Then I have a value of 3, and the label is 21 years or older. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. Now that I'm finished adding all of my value labels, I click on OK. For the fourth variable, for the question 3, the third variable, I have a variable labeled race. Then I'm going to click in the values and enter the values for race. 1 represents African American, so I go ahead and add that. A 2 represents Asian. I'm going to enter and add that. A 3 represents Hispanic / Latino. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. A 4 represents Caucasian. And a 5 is going to be an other category. Once I've entered all of those labels, I go ahead and click on OK and move on to question 4, which is the status of the student. In this case, a 1 is representing U.S. citizen. So I'm going to add that, and a 2 is representing, excuse me, since I made an error there, I am going to highlight that again, and I'm going to change the 1 because 1 actually represents international student. So now I'm going to hit the change button, and that will be changed. Then I'm going to go in and enter a 2, and the label for 2 is U.S. citizen, so I'm going to add that. And then the label, a value of 3, is going to represent other, and I'm going to go ahead and click on OK there. Now I see that I've got to enter questions 5 and 6, and the labels I'm going to give these questions so that it is easier for me to read the output are the actual survey items. So I'm going to enter the virtual advising process informed me of the necessary course requirements for scheduling classes. And in this case, when I do my labels, I have a 4 that is going to represent strongly agree. So I'm going to add that in there. A 3 is going to represent agree. A 2 is going to represent disagree. So I add that. And a 1 is going to represent strongly disagree. By coding the variables so that the higher numbers of 4 represent more agreement, if we did compute a mean for these values, we could see that the higher the mean, the more agreement we have. The lower the mean, the lower the agreement. I've entered those 4 values, so I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And what I notice is that these labels are the same for questions 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. So I don't have to enter that every single time for every question. Instead, I'm going to make sure that I'm highlighted in that cell. So I go ahead into that values cell, and then I'm going to go ahead up to the Edit menu and say Copy. Then I'm going to come down and I'm going to hold my mouse button down so that I can highlight questions 6 through 13 in the values column. Then I'm going to go ahead and hit Edit, Paste. And now those labels are copied down for all of the questions. So if you do happen to have the same value labels, you don't have to enter them more than once. Enter it once, go ahead and copy that. Then you can highlight the cells that you want to paste to and then paste it right in. In this example, I have one more question that I need to provide the label for, and that is question 6. That says, through virtual advising, I received, whoops, I received accurate information about the academic policies and registration procedures. Okay, so now I've got all of my labels entered down this column, and I've got almost all of my values entered. I have one more to do for the very last question in the data set, and this is a satisfaction question. So in here, a value of 4 is going to represent extremely satisfied. So I go ahead and type that in and click on Add. A value of 3 represents the label satisfied. A value of 2 represents the label dissatisfied. And a value of 1 represents the label extremely dissatisfied. So I'm going to go ahead and add those in. I've got my 4 labels, and I go ahead and click on OK. So this presentation, again, worked with an existing data set that already had data entered. And the variables were labeled, simply put, for a questionnaire, Q1 through Q7. I just noticed that I accidentally mislabeled one of the questions here, so I'm going to go ahead and call this Q6, which it should be. So I have the variable names, but what would be better when I'm looking at output is to actually have a description of what those question 1, question 2, question 3, etc. are. So I prefer the label to be very descriptive, in this case the actual survey item, and then for the values, so that in the output I don't have 50% ones and 50% twos. Instead, I'll have the percent labeled male and female for gender, or the specific age groups for age, and I won't have to go back and look at the survey to see what a 1, 2, or 3 actually mean. So anytime you create a data set in SPSS, it is recommended that you go and you give your variables labels, and if it's appropriate, you give the values of those variables labels. In this case, since we're dealing with survey data, value labels found under this values column were appropriate for all of our questions. So again, this is Mary Hansen, and this presentation was on how to set up a data file, namely by using labels and value labels.